The last blanket. Warmth money can't buy. The city never sleeps. Neon lights flickered, horns honked, and thousands of people walked past each other every evening, too busy to notice the invisible lives that shared the same streets. For most, the city was a place of opportunity, wealth, and ambition. But for some, it was a place of forgotten dreams and endless cold nights. Michael was one of the forgotten. He hadn't always been this way. Once, he had a small apartment, a stable job in a factory, and a family he thought would last forever. But life can be cruelly unpredictable. A workplace accident left him unable to keep his job. Bills piled up. His wife, tired of struggle, left with their only daughter. The eviction notice came not long after. Before he could understand what had happened, Michael found himself with nothing but a torn backpack, worn-out shoes, and a thin blanket that couldn't fight off the biting cold. For 5 long years, the streets became his home. He slept under bridges, on park benches, in doorways of stores that closed at night. Every morning, he would watch people rushing past, their hands holding coffee cups, their eyes glued to their phones, their lives far away from his reality. Yet, Michael never begged aggressively. He never yelled or cursed at those who ignored him. He simply sat there, quietly holding a cardboard sign, just hungry. Anything helps. Some days, a few coins dropped into his cup. Other days, not a single glance came his way. One bitter winter night, as the temperature dipped below freezing, Michael curled up against the wall of a closed bakery. His body trembled violently from the cold. He clutched the old blanket tighter around his shoulders, knowing it wasn't enough to keep him alive if the frost got worse. He watched the city lights blur in his teary eyes and thought, maybe tomorrow I won't wake up. Maybe that's not so bad. Then he saw her. A small figure walked hesitantly towards him. A little girl, no older than 7. She wore a pink coat, slightly oversized, and held her mother's hand. The mother looked tired, her clothes worn, but clean. Clearly, they weren't wealthy themselves. The child stared at Michael with curious, innocent eyes, while most adults looked away. She whispered something to her mom, who nodded reluctantly. The little girl let go of her mother's hand and walked closer. Michael lifted his head weakly, not wanting to scare her. She looked at him, at his shivering body, and then slowly removed the small blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A bright, soft, warm-looking blanket. She held it out to him. Michael's eyes widened. "No, sweetheart, you keep it," he said with a hoarse voice. "It's too cold." But the girl shook her head firmly. "Mom says you need it more." Tears welled up in Michael's eyes as he took the blanket, his rough hands trembling. "Thank you. Thank you so much," he whispered, his voice cracking. The little girl simply smiled, the kind of smile only a pure heart could give, and ran back to her mother. They both disappeared into the busy street, leaving Michael holding the warmest gift he'd ever received. Not just a blanket, but a piece of humanity. That night, for the first time in years, Michael slept without shivering. Morning came with pale sunlight spilling over the city's rooftops. Michael woke up still wrapped in the little girl's blanket. It wasn't just the warmth that felt different. Something inside him stirred, a fragile spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. He remembered the child's innocent eyes, the simple yet powerful act of kindness. In a world that often passed him by, someone had stopped. Someone had seen him. Someone had given him warmth without expecting anything in return. That day, Michael decided something had to change. He was tired of just surviving. He wanted to live again. He started visiting the local shelter more regularly, asking if there were any day jobs available. It wasn't easy. People looked at him and saw only a homeless man, not the hardworking person he once was. But Michael didn't give up. Every rejection stung, but every memory of that little girl reminded him, if someone believes you're worth saving, maybe you are. Weeks turned into months. He did odd jobs, washing dishes, sweeping sidewalks, carrying boxes. The pay was small, but he saved every penny, determined to claw his way out of the cold streets. One day, a cafe owner named Daniel noticed Michael's persistence. Rain or shine, he showed up early, ready to work, never complaining. Daniel offered him a part-time position cleaning tables and taking out the trash. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the first real chance Michael had been given in years. With steady work came stability. Michael rented a tiny room at a cheap motel. It wasn't much, but it had 4 walls and a bed. A place where he didn't have to fear freezing to death. Each night before sleeping, he folded the pink blanket neatly and placed it beside him. It was his most treasured possession, not for its warmth anymore, but for what it represented. Kindness, humanity, hope. 2 years passed. Michael had worked his way up to full-time at the cafe, eventually becoming a trusted manager. He saved enough to rent a small apartment and even started taking night classes in hospitality management. Slowly, the pieces of his life came back together, but he never forgot the streets. He never forgot the hunger, the loneliness, the cold, and above all, he never forgot the little girl who gave him her last blanket. So, every winter, Michael used part of his savings to buy blankets and sandwiches. He handed them out to the homeless, walking the same streets he once slept on. Each time he knelt down to offer warmth to someone shivering in the dark, he thought of her. One night, as he gave a blanket to a young boy curled up against a wall, the child looked up with wide, tearful eyes and whispered, "Thank you, sir." Michael smiled softly and said, "No, thank you. I know what it's like to be cold." And in that moment, he realized the little girl's kindness hadn't just saved him physically, it had saved his soul. And now, through him, it was saving others too. 10 years after receiving the last blanket, Michael had built a modest life. He owned a small cafe of his own, a warm, inviting place where no one was ever turned away hungry. A sign by the counter read, "If you can't pay today, your meal is on us. Everyone deserves warmth." One snowy evening, a mother and daughter walked in, looking tired from the cold. The girl, now a teenager, still had the same bright eyes Michael remembered. He froze, heart pounding. Could it be her? They ordered hot cocoa and sat by the window. Michael gathered his courage, approached their table, and asked softly, "Excuse me, were you, many years ago, a little girl who once gave a homeless man her blanket?" The girl blinked, surprised. Her mother looked up sharply. After a moment, recognition dawned on the woman's face. "Oh my... Michael?" Tears filled his eyes as he nodded. "You saved me," he whispered. "That blanket. It changed everything." The girl gasped, covering her mouth, and the mother's eyes glistened. "We didn't know what happened to you," she said softly. "We just hoped you were okay." Michael smiled through tears. "I'm more than okay. Because of you, I found a reason to live. And now, I try to give that same warmth to others." They hugged like long-lost family, strangers once bound by a single act of kindness, now reunited by fate. In a world obsessed with wealth, fame, and power, it's easy to believe that only grand gestures matter. But sometimes, the smallest act, a blanket on a freezing night, can change the course of a life forever. Michael kept the pink blanket, now carefully preserved in a frame on the cafe's wall. Underneath, a plaque read, "Kindness doesn't cost much, but its value is infinite." Every customer who read it walked out with a softer heart, reminded that humanity is measured not by what we keep, but by what we give away. And somewhere, on a cold night in another city, perhaps another little girl is taking off her blanket to share with someone who needs it more. Because kindness, once planted, never stops growing.